The way we're going to structure the time we have together is we're always going to give a bit of an input in a moment or two on the policy context for the work that we're doing, and then Jim and Linda are going to take you through the history of the Rights in Action campaign and how we have tried to use human rights instruments to put pressure on very poor housing conditions in Dublin House and the way in which we've tried to work with it.
I suppose the key areas in terms of the theory and the contextual framework is the trend of the physical and socio-economic decline of social housing estates in Ireland. And since the 1980s, successive Irish governments have implemented neoliberal policies which have prioritised home ownership, encouraged local authority tenant purchase, and also we've seen an inadequate management and investment in maintenance of local authority housing, which has led to what Padraig referred to earlier as this residualisation of social housing as a tenure in Ireland. The areas of social housing estates have become characterised by increasingly higher levels of socio-economic deprivation and disadvantage, and while many local authority estates have remained stable and are well managed with strong communities, through the 1980s and 1990s they became the most deprived areas in the country and characterised by substandard housing conditions, high unemployment, drug addiction, issues of gang-related crime and low education participation rates. In the early 2000s then, we had a government policy which was in relation to the regeneration of these areas, which was focused on, it was to be done through a policy called public-private partnerships, whereby a developer was given the land on the estates. This was particular to Dublin City Council. The developer was given the land on the estates. They were to demolish the estates and rebuild a new social mix, which would be private housing, a reduced amount of social housing and other community facilities, but also things like education, school facilities. And it was also then expanded in terms of Limerick, the regeneration down there. A large part of it was based on this concept of using private funding. By 2007, the City Council were still pushing the community to accept a public-private partnership regeneration and wanted to start detenanting, which is moving people out in preparation for this regeneration. The community argued that they wouldn't agree to this detenanting until regeneration was clearly agreed. And as a result, the estate is still fully tenanted. I don't have photographs there, but other estates that I mentioned there, like St. Teresa's Gardens, St. Michael's estate, are completely empty and the plans weren't fulfilled. In 2008, we set up a maintenance initiative, which was where community workers, myself and other community workers with tenants and the City Council, we set up a group where we would try and work out the issues that tenants had in terms of sewage, dampness, and there was actually quite a bit of progress. But then the City Council introduced a policy in 2009 where if a tenant had rent arrears, they would no longer carry out their maintenance complaints. And this made progress very difficult and progress halted. At the same time, we had the financial and property crash, which resulted in the collapse of this model of public-private partnerships as developers withdrew. So while other communities had a severe reduction in number of tenants and were left in a downward spiral, the community in Dolphin had refused that option of detenanting and was trying to find ways to support the community and engage tenants in trying to get a regeneration and improve conditions, and that's when we looked at investigating the human rights-based approach.
So I began to attend the occasional meeting and eventually was asked to do a little bit, and eventually the little bit became 2 little bits and so on. So the other thing that's remarkable about Dolphin Park, or Dolphin House, is that it's very women driven. It's one of the only organisation, the only thing I've ever been in where there's women far outnumber men taking part, which may say something about the nature of the whole thing, because it has great life in it and a great vitality. So I'll tell you the story now of how we came to use human rights as a lever, as it were, for getting regeneration. I should just give you an idea of what size that this is. There's 392 flats and there's 44 senior citizens units in the place. So it's quite big. It's a population of, it'd be well over 1,000, I don't know exactly what it is, but it's like a big village. But because the flats were built so long ago, and because over the previous decade, the City Council had been saying, oh, don't mind your problems, we're going to be regenerating, we're going to demolish the whole lot. Sewerage, dam, problems like that were all sort of a stick and plaster put on them. There was no serious effort in the previous 10 years to do anything substantial about conditions that were deteriorating through age, but mainly through neglect. Because if the routine maintenance isn't being done, the place very quickly runs into that thing of neglect. So there were talks, there were meetings, and at first the meetings were about the choice of a public-private partnership that, as has been said, about demolition and rebuilding for new. And the people were given a sort of a thing of a choice of between, say, about 4 or 5 alternatives. Which would they go for? And they went for, you know, demolish and rebuild, but they wanted the community to stay intact. However, the public-private partnerships crashed with the economic crash, the banking crash. So it was no longer a viable alternative. And we had very quickly realised that model was gone. But we didn't know what to do because we were used to a situation of neglect of the City Council not wanting to do even the routine maintenance and to say do major work. So we were a bit desperate as to what way to turn. But there were some of the people came in, and some especially Cecilia and them came in with this idea about human rights. And we thought, God, that's a novel approach, and we realised that you had to do more than, because there had been, you know, pickets, demonstrations on City Hall and all that, and basically you knew it was like water off a duck. They were taking no interest whatsoever in your, and in fact even the electoral system wasn't working because the city managers can ignore the councillors. So the democratic system had also effectively collapsed. That there was no cure through going to your councillors and lobbying your councillors, because they couldn't do anything either. They said the city councillor can overrule them, and that was happening. So we decided to listen and talk about what is human rights, and how could it benefit us. So the things turned to, well, what human rights, what rights do we have? And well, we were told it was the 1948, the European, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. There was also a European human rights, and there was also the Constitution of the state. So between all those, we hope to find things. What we had done then was, the next bit was, in those flats which were affected by the damp, the way it affects you is, apart from the physical damp, because walls are damp, mould starts to grow on the walls. And when you wipe it off, it simply comes back. When you paint over it, it comes back. It's like something you just can't kill. It's got an eternal life. It comes back through anything.
Maybe Linda might just give us a little bit of the lived experience of that, because you've actually lived with the damp, haven't you?
Yeah. I've been a tenant in Dolphin House for 8 years. I've lived in 2 separate flats. In the first flat I lived in, I would have had damp like this and a bit worse in both bedrooms. But I never had it around the living area, so it was never a big, I never kind of felt like it was a huge issue, because it wasn't in your area where you lived all day, if you understand what I mean. And then 18 months ago I moved to a new accommodation in Dolphin House, a new flat, and I've had damp for the 18 months that I've lived there, you know, quite quite severe in some rooms, and it's quite smelly, but would definitely be bad in your living area where you do most of your daily stuff. And when it's really visible to you, it makes it harder thing to live with, you know. I've been to the council. They said that it wasn't damp to open your vents, leave your windows open, don't hang your washing on the radiators. This was causing the damp. So the city council came and had a look, and they put a ventilator in, a big kind of ventilator that would suck in bad air and blow in good air, and this would help the damp. This didn't work, it didn't make any difference. So it was a case of redecorating, cleaning it off and coming back. So then, just before Christmas, when I was getting married, we decided we were going to decorate one more time, clean it all off. We used mildew stuff and damp paint to stop it from coming through again, and then we would put wallpaper up. About 4 weeks later it was back and a lot worse. Now, Dublin City Council had done a survey, Rory, wasn't it, on tenants who had severe damp, tenants who had damp, and it was to see who had like severe. It was major, minor and very little. I think that's the way it worked. And they had said that there was no damp in my flat. And I kind of disagreed with them and said that there was. So they came back and done it for a second time. And the Dublin City Council have decided that there are 26 flats within the complex who have really severe damp. And the idea is that they're going to move these people out, redo their flats to EU standard of living, and then move them back in. And I rated in one of those 26 people. So clearly their idea of me not having damp was very different to what the outcome was. You know.
Just to briefly go through, to kind of fill in on what Jim was saying, the Minister for the Environment, which would have been Michael Finneran at the time in 2010, was asked after the first hearing that we did, you know, what's happening in Dolphin House and the Dáil, and he stated at the time that, well, it's Dublin City Council's responsibility and we're waiting for plans for them. Then if you go on to, in October, the response again from the media, there was an article in the Irish Times, and the tenants were told by the official response that regeneration was years away. In March 2011, again following another hearing, we got more media coverage, and then after what Jim referred to there, the primetime hearing, the Minister was asked in the Dáil, the new Minister after the election of the new government, it was Willie Penrose, the Minister of State for Housing, was asked in June 2011, and we can see there the significant change that has happened, reflected by the Minister for Housing speaking in the Dáil about this, that he actually went and met the City Council senior staff as a result of the highlighting and the work done by the campaign, and was accepted. He states there that he accepts the accommodation, which was designed and built over 50 years ago, is not of acceptable standard. And I think if you move on just briefly then, there was also then a court case where a specific tenant who had sewage coming up his shower was the circuit court judge found against him. There was also then the survey that the council undertook, the first time they've undertaken a comprehensive survey of a local authority flats complex, and 94 flats, they found 94 of the 400, roughly about a quarter, just over a quarter, flats with varying degrees of mould, and as you see there, the different risks, the different levels of them there. I put around an article from the Irish Times, which is just of March there, which refers to the human rights work, the comments by the Human Rights Commission, Dr. Maurice Manning, who was at the hearings, and it refers to a regeneration plan has now gone into the Department of Environment as a result of the pressure and work done. And I suppose the main reflections, I suppose from an academic perspective, are trying to look at this, trying to see what relevance is this campaign to other areas. And I suppose the key thing is that it's not just another campaign, it actually, the use of the human rights approach gave, as we can see here, tenants who are able to talk about their experiences through a human rights based approach. In the majority of, or most of this, it's either solicitors or people speaking on behalf of tenants. The key aspect of this was empowering tenants to speak for themselves, using that language and using the framework of human rights, which I think we can show that if you compare it to other estates, they haven't had the same impact of highlighting their issues and putting the whole problem in a human rights frame I believe, got access to greater media coverage, it got greater political and social public support because it was put in that framework. It also, I think the interest in comparisons, part of maybe the discussion here, is comparing it to the legal route, and we decided to go down the route of publicly using the human rights, the UN human rights based approach rather than an individual legalistic point of view, because it was about the support of a whole community and not just individuals. And I think if you were to look at the progression that has been achieved in 2 years in comparison to legal cases that have been going on at the same time, they haven't achieved the same progress. There has been a number of cases, yes, an individual got compensation, and there's a number of cases which have been settled out of court as well. But the problem in those cases is they leave no legacy for the wider community, there's no ability to use it, and in what we're seeing as a result of this campaign or social movement, which is based on human rights, is a significant shift of resources of the state into Dolphin House to support it. And I think that's really the application of human rights in this case is very innovative and can really be used by other communities, and we are looking to approach with other communities addressing the issue of a collective complaint under the Council of Europe, European Social Charter. And I think